Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's me again, Ma'am Cyrene, to give you another video lesson on our science. It's been a long time. Let's start this video lesson with this question. What is medicines for? Well, obviously, these medicines are used to cure, to halt, or even prevent any kind of diseases, and most especially to save lives. Now, these medicines are made from laboratories from mixing various kinds of chemicals. And these medicines could be either in a form of liquid, drops, creams, tablets, inhalers, or even injection. So, many of us believe with the power of medicine. But have you ever wondered how these medicines produce a right amount of dosage needed? So for us to produce a right amount of dosage in every medicine that we are taking in, someone has to figure it out how much of each ingredient is needed for us. And that is why we have this lesson, mole concept. Ito na tayo ngayon sa week 7 ng Science 9 module. O diba? Isang module na lang at tapos na natin ang second quarter at makakatapos na tayo ng 2 quarter for this school year. O diba? Ang bilis lang ng taon. Now, on this video lesson, what we will talk about is the mole concept. Ano ba tong mole concept na to? Let's now discuss about the mole and molar mass of each element and compound. So what is mole? Mole comes from the Latin word means to heap or a huge pile. This mole is the fundamental unit of measurement of substances. For us to measure a substance, we need to use mole. And this mole is expressed in grams. You should always take note of this. 1 mole is equivalent to 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd power particles or atoms. And this is what we call as Avogadro's number. And take note, this equivalent value is equivalent value for all the elements in the periodic table. So whether it is a hydrogen, a calcium, a nitrogen, or any other elements in the periodic table, they are always equivalent to 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd power particles, equivalent to 1 mole. To our definition a while ago with the mole, it's the fundamental unit of measurement for the substance. Now, if it is fundamental unit of measurement, the question is, why mole is fundamental in chemistry? Bakit nga ba siya fundamental? Ano ba yung salitang fundamental? When we say fundamental, it is equivalent to the word necessary. When we say necessary, kinakailangan. So, bakit kailangan ang mole in chemistry? So, the reason why mole is fundamental in chemistry, just like in medicines, you cannot simply put up any kind of ingredients or any amount of ingredients na gusto mong ilagay sa isang gamot. Since gamot is used to cure and it should be accurate, kailangan tama lahat ng substances na ilalagay mo doon. So, hindi ka pwedeng tagdag dito, bawas dito, lagay nito, tanggal dito. So, hindi pwedeng ganon. And for us to be accurate, this mole concept will allow you to determine the molecular mass and formula of any substance. So for us to be specific with the mass, kung gaano ba kadaming ganyan, gaano kadaming ganito, gaano kadaming ilalagay kung ganyan. So para accurate ang gagawin natin, the molar mass will help you determine its mass and formula. So that's the reason why mole is fundamental in chemistry. We all now understand the concept of mole and the reason why we have this mole concept, let's now start the computation on how to compute molar mass. So let us have first the calculation on how to calculate moles and the number of atoms. Now, in this computation, what we are referring to is the computation for each element. For example, we are only referring to one element in the periodic table, then we will use the following formulas. Now, on the computation of mole and number of particles, we will encounter four formulas. Those are the conversion of mass to mole, mole to mass, number of particles to mass, and mass to number of particles. So let us have now this computation. So let us have the first one, which is mole to mass. In the computation of mole to mass, we have this formula of mole multiply with the mass divide by the mole will give you the answer of mass. You always take note that mass should have the unit of grams and mole will have the unit of MOL. So pinaikli lang siyang mole, tinanggal natin yung letter E. So take note always that mole will be MOL and mass should always be in grams. Now the computation of mole to mass, you need to find the value of the mole and the value of the grams. The grams in the equation is referring to the mass of the element given in the question. So for us to understand the computation of mass, of mole to mass, let us have an example. Okay, so this would be our example number 1. What is the mass of a 3.00 mole of C? Now, on this example, we have now a specific element given in the question, and that is C. C stands for the element of carbon. So, mean to say, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito sa ating example is the element carbon. Since sabi nga natin, this computation is referring into only one element, so ito na nga yung element na sinasabi natin. But, take note, it is not always that carbon is the element. We may use any element in the periodic table, but in our question today, we'll have carbon. Now, on the question, what we will find is the value of its mass, given that carbon has 3.0 mole. Now, to find the value of the mass, we'll have this formula. Mass, mole, is equals to mass divided by the mole. Now, anong given ang ilalagay natin sa ating mole sa unahan? So, yung mole natin sa unahan ay lalagyan natin ng given natin sa question na 3.00 mole of carbon. So, that would be the value of the mole dun sa unahan. Then, multiply it with the value of the mass. Wala tayong given na mass sa question. So, anong ilalagay natin na mass sa question? Nasabi natin kanina, this mass is referring to the mass itself of the given element. Since the given element is carbon, then you have to take a look of the mass of this element, carbon. So to find the mass of the carbon, you have to look on a periodic table to see its mass. So looking on the periodic table, we'll find C has a mass of 12.01 grams. So yung mass ng carbon na 12.01 na nakita natin sa periodic table, ang siyang ilalagay natin na given para sa ating formula. So we'll have 3.00 mole of C multiplied by 12.01 grams of carbon divided by mole. Ano ilalagay natin sa mole? Since we have only one carbon, 1 mole, so ilalagay natin is 1 mole of C for carbon. Then, cancel the same unit, cancel the mole of C of carbon and the mole of C of carbon sa baba, then matitira sa ating unit is the grams of carbon. So, that way, makukuha natin ang kanyang mass. So, multiply 3.00 multiply by the 12.01 grams will give you an answer of 36.03 grams of carbon. So, meaning to say Sa 3.0 mole of carbon, there is a 36.03 grams of carbon. Okay, another equation that we will encounter is the reciprocal of the first formula. So, kung kanina is mole to mass, ngayon naman is mass to mole. Nabaliktad naman ang pwesto. Yung ating mole naman ang hinahanap at mass naman ang given natin. So, to find the value of your mass going to mole, so mababaliktad din ang pwesto ng ating formula. So, in this way, mauuna nating ibibigay is the mass multiply by the mole divided by the mass, then we'll have the answer of the mole. Let us have another example. So for the conversion of mass to mole, this is our example. How many mole are present in 25.6 grams of C? Again, in this question, we are referring to the element carbon. So since element carbon pa rin ang tinutukoy natin, then ang gagamitin natin na value of mass is still 12.01 grams of carbon. So to get the value of mole, our formula will now be mass multiplied by the mole divided by mass will give you the answer of mole. Let us have now the given in the formula. So, yung given natin ngayon na 25.6 grams, ang siyang ilalagay natin na mass sa ating unang mass sa unahan. So, we have 25.6 grams of C multiplied by, since we only have 1 carbon, then 1 mole of C ang ilalagay natin sa taas, then divide it by the mass of the carbon. Take note, yung mass natin sa equation natin dito sa kabilang side ay palaging tumutukoy sa mass nung element. So since the element is still carbon, so we will have 12.01 grams of carbon. Cancel the same unit, grams of carbon, cancel grams of carbon, so ang matitira natin is mole of carbon. So, pwede na nating makuha ang ating answer. 25.6 grams of carbon multiplied by 1 mole of carbon is 25.6 divided by 12.01 grams of carbon will give you an answer of 2.13 mole of carbon. And that's now our final answer for the question on how many mole. Meaning to say, there are 2.13 mole of carbon in a 25.6 grams of carbon. So that's how we compute the value of mass to mole. Okay, so natapos na natin i-discuss ang how to calculate the value of mole. Ngayon, let us now focus with the calculation of the number of atoms. In the number of atoms or in the number of particles, again, we will encounter two formulas. Those are number of particles to mass and then mass to number of particles. So let us have now first the number of particles to mass. Now, in the number of particles going to the mass, ibig sabihin, ang hinahanap natin is the mass of the given element in a specific number of particles. Kapag ganito ang equation natin, hindi tayo pwedeng dumiretso ng number of particles papunta agad sa mass. Kailangan dumaan muna tayo sa number of particles to mole and then mole to mass. So, wala tayong formula or equation na diretsong number of particles papunta sa mass. So, magagamit natin ay dalawang formula. So, to get the value of mass in the number of particles, we'll have number of particles multiply by mole divided by the number of particles multiply by grams divided by mole. That's how we will have the answer of mass. So let us have first an example. Okay, so this would be our example for the number of particles going to mass. What is the mass of 1.806 times 10 to the 24th atoms of carbon. So still we're referring to the element carbon in this question. So yun pa rin ang gagamitin nating value ng mass, which is 12.01. Now, to get the answer for this, kailangan mo munang i-convert ang number of particles going to mole and then mole going to grams para makuha natin ang ating final answer. So the number of particles is referring to the given, which is 1.806 times 10 to the 24th atoms. Multiply by mole, 1 mole of carbon, divided by number of particles. On this side, we're referring to the 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd atoms. If you can still remember, 1 mole is equivalent to 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd atoms, and that is what we are referring to the number of particles. So meaning to say, sa ganitong klase ng tanong o equation, palagi mong gagamitin yung 6.022 sa value ng number of particles sa ating equation. Pero kapag may given tayo, yun ang ilalagay mo sa unahan. Ilalagay mo lang yung 6.022 ay dito sa ating equation sa kabilang side. Then, idugtong mo na yung isang formula, which is mass divide by mole. So, yung mass na gagamitin natin is the mass of the carbon element, which is 12.01 grams of carbon, divided by 1 mole of carbon. So the equation will be 1.806 times 10 to the 24th atom, multiplied by 1, divide by 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd power, then multiply by 12.01 grams of carbon, divide by 1 mole of carbon, will give you the final answer of 36.01 grams of carbon. So that will be your final answer. So nagkaroon tayo ngayon ng dalawang equation. One is number of particle to mole, and then the other one is mole to grams. Okay, so what if nabaliktad ang ating equation at ang hinahanap mo naman ngayon is mass at ang given mo naman is number of particles? So, ganun din, babaliktarin mo lang yung ating position ng ating formula. So, magkakaroon ka ulit ng dalawang equation. First thing is to convert your mass going to mole and then mole going to number of particles. Kagaya ng ginawa natin kanina sa unang equation ng number of particles to mass. Ngayon naman, babalik na rin natin yung process. So, let us have an example. Okay, so this is now our example for mass to number of particles. How many individual atoms are present in 24.8 grams of carbon? Again, carbon is still the element used in the question, so the value of mass will still be 12.01 grams. Now, to convert the mass to number of particles, unahin muna natin si mass to mole. So, to convert the mass going to mole, mass multiplied by mole divided by mass. So, we have 24.8 grams of carbon multiplied by 1 mole of carbon divided by 12.01 grams of carbon. So, yung 24.8 is from the given and then 12.01 is from the mass of carbon. Then, the answer, idiretso mo na into conversion of mole to number of particles. So, we'll have number of particles divided by mole. So, the number of particles is referring to 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd power atoms divided by 1 mole of carbon will give you the final answer of, so we have 24.8 grams multiplied by 1 mole divided by 12.01 grams multiplied by 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd atoms divide by 1 will give you the final answer of 2.14 times 10 to the 24th atoms of carbon. And that's now your final answer in finding the number of particles in the mass of 24.8 grams of carbon. So those are the 4 formulas that you may encounter in the calculation of mole and the number of particles or atoms. So let us have this sample problem. We have sample problem number 1 and sample problem number 2. You may answer this problem solving in your own on your notebook and find out if your answer is correct. So now that we have learned how to compute the molar mass of each element, now what if the equation used is a compound? Ibig sabihin, element is more than one. For example, we have H2O, which is water. So that's no longer an element, but is now a compound. So how you will now compute for the mole of this compound? So to compute for the value of a compound, that is now what we call as formula mass. Kanina ay molecular mass or molar mass because we only referring to one element. So since this is now a compound, we now call it as formula mass. So our next lesson will be how to calculate the molar mass of compound. So here are now the example for the compound, which is you have to find the molar mass. Example, what is the mass of a 2.55 mole of Na2SO4? So ang given natin ngayon na element ay hindi na iisa. Instead, we have 3 elements mentioned in the compound, which is Na, sodium, S, sulfur, and O for oxygen. So the step 1 that you should do in a compound is to find its formula mass. Again, formula mass is the atomic mass of each element multiplied by the number of atoms in the compound. So ang una mong gawin is to enumerate all the elements mentioned in the compound. So we have Na, S, and O. So now that you have enumerated all the elements mentioned in the compound, identify how many atoms present in the compound. Once that we're referring to how many atoms present in the compound, you will take a look on the subscript number given. Yung mga number na 2, 4, that's referring to the number of atoms for each element. Since we have Na2, meaning to say there are 2 atoms of sodium. For the sulfur, which is S, walang number na katabi, so that's automatic equivalent to number 1. So we have only 1 atom of sulfur in the compound. And then, for the oxygen, which is O4, that's 4 number of atoms for oxygen. So now that you know the number of atoms for each element, find now the value of their mass. So tingnan mo yung mass ng sodium, tingnan mo yung mass ng sulfur, tingnan mo rin yung mass ng oxygen in the periodic table. So the sodium has a mass of 22.99 grams. Sulfur has 32.07 grams, and oxygen has 16.00 grams. So now that you have find out their mass for each element, multiply the number of atom with the number of mass. So you have the value of your formula mass, which is 142.05 grams per mole, you may now do the conversion of your question, which is find the value of mass in a 2.55 mole of Na2SO4. So your formula will still be mole multiplied by the value of mass divided by mole will give you the answer of mass. So, yung value of mole mo na 2.55 ang ilalagay mo dun sa mass na nasa unahan. So, you have 2.55 mole of Na2SO4 multiplied by the mass. Since ang nire-refer natin dito na mass ay mass ng compound, so hindi individual mass ang ilalagay mo. Instead, your formula mass, which is 142.05 grams per mole. So, yun yung ilalagay mo na mass value para sa taas. Then, divide by 1 mole of Na2SO4. So, will give you an answer of 2.55 multiply by 142.05 grams per mole of Na2SO4 will give you the final answer of 362.23 mass or grams of Na2SO4. So, mean to say you have 362.23 grams of Na2SO4 for a 2.55 mole of Na2SO4. So, that's how we find the molar mass for a compound. Okay, so let us have this sample problem in finding the molar mass of a compound. So, you may answer this sample problem on your notebook or any piece of paper and then find out if your answer will be correct. That's it! Congratulations! You have just learned the mole concept and how to compute the molar mass of each element and compound. So this ends our video lesson today about the mole concept. Stay tuned for our next video lesson as the continuation of the mole, which is the percent composition of each compound. See you again in my next video lesson. Do not forget to subscribe on my YouTube channel to be updated for the next video lessons. I hope that you have learned something new today. Goodbye and see you next time.